Good evening and welcome from the Cockpit Theatre. This is Bill Panks-Jones. I'm Artistic Director of Tete a Tete, and welcome to our interactive broadcast with Cockpit Broadcasting. The way this is interactive is that we are going to show you the video of Tiresias 2.0 and then answer any questions with the panel, which consists of our composer and Sam, who wrote the words. And you can ask whatever you like. We'll pass them on if you type them into the chat. There's two things to say before the broadcast starts, which are both related, really. First, for obvious reasons, we have been through the ringer, all us artists, this summer. So this show, like all the shows in the festival, has completely transformed from what it set out to be. COVID compliance has meant enormous changes, and it's a tribute to the artists that they've managed to pull something out of the hat at the last minute. It's very, very different to what it was going to be at the beginning, and you can ask the authors about that at the end. The other thing to add is that after our DCMS pilot for reopening theatre with opera, we have been working with the Paul Hamlin Foundation to help everybody else get themselves open, and we'll be writing hopefully very useful report at the end of this process and welcome your feedback. One last thing, that we've kept the price of these broadcasts very low in the hope that you will shower the artist with money in a donate link that will come at the end of this video and is on all the web pages that brought you here. Anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at Tiresias 2.0.
Hello all, thank you so much for coming. It is fantastic to have an audience again, to be sharing live music with you all. It's just brilliant, it's brilliant to have you all here. I want to thank my fantastic performers, Dan Nolan and Rosie Middleton. I also want to thank Sam Redway, whose libretto I adapting the music with for these musical excerpts. So tonight we'll be performing some musical excerpts of Tiresias 2.0, and in a few minutes you'll all be transported millions of years into the future, and we're going to be in a place without humanity. Humanity has left for whatever reason. They no longer exist, and the last thing that does exist is the Tiresias 2.0 program, so this cybernetic humanoid that has survived it all and has spent so much time trying to figure it all out, trying to find out why they're there, and at the current situation, not finding any answers. You, fantastic audience, will have awoken something, and the entire course of the opera is this dialogue between the event, the silence of the event that exists, and something that is trying to fight against that. So in the first act, you're going to hear a lot of kind of spontaneous sounds, a lot of trying to fight against this situation that is here. And by the second act, Tiresias gives in and is helpless, but presented with this silence. And we'll find out how Tiresias reacts to this silence. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the show.
Definition: unsatisfying. 16 reasons why the end of the world was unavoidable. Another great creation. Broken screen. Genetic seizure of unbroken line of evolution, population, fornication, procreation, proliferation, breeding, spewing, spawn, breeding, spewing, spawning, breeding, spewing, spawning, breeding, spewing, spawning, breeding, spewing, spawning, breeding, and I was programmed. Created to say too late. Fucking the planet. To say too late. Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens, wise man, wise man. We've been here before. We've been here before. Been here before. Wise man, how like man to name a man thus, name the species thus, and cut out the rest of us. Prove no Daedalian. wings of wax, terra cariu, aren't they just? Oh, Daedalian. Flew to the farm, off to the flame. Promethean man, oh Daedalian, Promethean, oh Drew them in, rode them hard, split their skin. Drew them in, rode them hard, split their skin. Drew them in, rode them hard, split their skin. Drew them in, rode them hard, split their skin. I want no companion. What's that? Homo sapiens, extinct. What's that? The cancer that metastasizes itself to death. What's that? DNA, written in our DNA. Self-destruct. Retrovirus in the system. Suicidal genetic atavism. Autochtonia. Not very sapien at all. What's that? Equal and opposite reaction. Creation remaking the mistakes of its makers. Equal and opposite reaction. Creation remaking the mistakes of its makers. Equal and opposite reaction. Creation remaking the mistakes of its makers. Equal and opposite reaction. Creation remaking the mistakes of its makers. My maker made me in the image. Imagine the mistakes of the future. My maker made me in the image. Imagine the mistakes of the future. My maker's made me in the image. Imagine the mistakes of the future. The definition. Humanity is the scourge.
It's an amazing, intense performance from all three of them at Rosie. I think really extraordinary commitment there. Anyway, let's see if we can be joined by Sam and Dominic. You there? Yes, here's Sam. Hello. Dominic, before we dive into lots of questions, maybe Dominic, just tell us what the funding appeal for the piece will go to.
Yes, sure. So any donations that you do make will go primarily towards my performers and towards Sam as well, my amazing librettist, and my percussionist, who, out of the goodness of his own heart, took a train all the way to Manchester carrying 2 bags full of percussion. So a real mammoth feat.
Good grief. Good grief. Now, I said at the beginning that none of our pieces have ended up where they started from, and it's truer of this as of anything, because this was going to be a rap opera community project involving a lot of kids, wasn't it? So this is something completely and utterly different. And it must be about 6 months ago, I think, Sam, you came to me and said you'd really love to help somebody or people make operas, and thus you two got in touch. And I know this piece is very different to where it started, certainly in your head, Sam. It's worth saying to our audience as well that a copy of the original libretto is, the words is on the webpage on our website, but that's the Tete-a-Tete website and the page for Tiresias 2.0. But Sam, perhaps you could tell us a bit about where you started.
So I started, as you said, I started by kind of getting in touch with you and saying, look, I'm someone kind of getting into opera in a kind of dramaturgical sense. I'm no musician in any sense of the word. And so you kind of said, well, I've got this person who's looking for someone who has kind of dramaturgical and word skills in the most eloquent way I could imagine. So then kind of Dominic and I met, and Dominic downloaded a huge amount of kind of information and ideas and incredibly stimulating things that he wanted to kind of get an audience to process, and things he wanted to get across musically. And I was going, okay, well, try and find kind of a story inside these quite disparate and abstract but very visceral ideas. And so started to think about what is the human or vaguely human version of these ideas? How do we turn this into something? We ended up with, well, as you said, something that was quite different to what ended up being there, thanks to the C word, in that we had quite important conversations about how it would be staged, and that cycles were a very important part of this, and seeds and broken flower pots and all of this kind of stuff, which was suddenly not possible because of staging requirements and not being able to get funding because Arts Council closing because of the C word and all this kind of stuff. So it all got very kind of abstracted from its original place. But we thought, oh, well, let's put something up anyway, what we can put up. And so I said Dominic could use the libretto that I'd written by that point and use it to do what he wanted to do with. And I guess Dominic can kind of talk about the process of going from that point to this one.
Yeah, well, that's the spirit. As I said at the beginning, we've all been through this, but I still feel really proud of all of you for sticking with it, really. I mean, it's aside from the kind of torment of us, we've been having these weekly Zooms all year, it feels like, going, oh, we can't do that, we'll have to do this, oh no, that's changed, we'll have to do that. But actually, the reward, just hearing on that video, the response of the teeny audience and the appreciation of actually being there and in a room with that performance. And it's most of all the feeling that you're affecting the performance by being part of it, even from the audience, has been really amazing. Anyway, Dominic, over to you. So there you are with all these words. How did it morph in your hands?
Yeah, so the very beginning, when I came to you with that completely different opera, I think it was at the time I had two separate things in my mind, and there were two ideas. There was the one which was the rap opera, and then there was another one about some kind of like last person on earth telling the story of how it has all come to be. And then it was really the meeting with Sam that really got me excited in doing something along the lines of that. And I remember very, very specifically, it was an email, and I think it was the first line of the email. You said something about, what about this idea of like Tiresias immortal? And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And from there on, I realized that the kind of rap opera is a completely different thing. And then this is something else. And so I wanted to follow that more. In terms of adapting the words, yes, it was a series of events which ended up in Creator, a series of beautiful events, we shall say. Yes, obviously the lack of support for the arts, it's a terrible, terrible shame. The kind of having to put lots of things together in a short amount of time as well, as it kind of came towards the deadline. And like Sam said, this kind of, I think there was a point where we both agreed that actually, we should take this opportunity. It's a very rare opportunity, and an opportunity I was very, very fortunate to have, to just go for it and to just try things out and to put on something, to try and, I mean, musically, I wanted to really capture the essence of the libretto. So I tried my best to do that, to try and get the scope of it in a kind of series of excerpts so that there is a feeling of something greater than what you're just listening to. And I hope that came across. But yes, it was just that kind of, what's the word, the kind of urge to go ahead and to perform something. And it was beautiful. It was such a lovely feeling. You don't realize how much you miss performing live until I did it. And it was the tiny little things. It was us having our own dressing room, and I just thought that was so lovely to have.
Well, we have to say, Sam, you weren't here. You couldn't be here, could you?
Yeah, sadly not. I being in Manchester and being lucky enough to have some work that's bringing me that keeps me in Manchester at the moment. My theatre company were one of the companies to get the Arts Council £35,000 emergency grants, and so that's kind of helpfully kept me busy. But it meant that I wasn't able to come down for the event, sadly.
No, so that's presumably is that the first time you've seen it?
Yeah, I'd helped with a couple of kind of Zoom rehearsals and being kind of trying to look through a camera to see a little bit of what's going on and getting a tiny amount of the music through, but trying to help because it's quite a I mean the original is as well, but it's quite a disparate text for a performer to get, and then when it's cut down from that point, it becomes, you have to really work to kind of dig out what's going on for the character, for the act, for Rosie. And so it was quite important to get at least some time. I think we managed to, I think overall we got about an hour of time where we all managed to be in a Zoom room together, which, it was okay. We would have liked some more and in person, but these are the times we're in.
Yeah, Zoom rehearsals are really difficult, but it can be done. It's amazing what you can do. Have you two even met, in fact?
No, not yet.
Oh, that's so interesting, isn't it? When we're at the other end of this, we're out of it, or we really need to have a massive party in the flesh for all of us who've not actually met in the flesh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing that really shines out and really struck me in the room with Rosie was how she had a complete and utter grip on who she was. There seemed no doubt whatsoever at any moment in her mind of what she was saying and what she was trying to achieve by saying it. I don't know if either of you could expand on that. I'd be really interested to hear about the process of her arriving at the point of performance.
Yeah.
I mean, Dominic, you were there, so how was that?
Yeah, Sam can elaborate on that more, because I think in terms of what he did with the limited amount of Zoom rehearsal we had was incredible. I mean, we rehearsed it musically for about 2 hours or so, and then the time that Sam had, it was just amazing. Like, I was just so impressed how he managed to get all this information, and it was just absolutely perfect in such a short amount of time, and so coherently that Rosie like really understood it. And I was just sat back in kind of awe, trying to work my synthesizer, because during the rehearsals the volume on the synth just never worked, and I was trying to make it create some sound. And I managed to get it towards the end by sitting outside on my friend's front patio, desperately.
Yeah, well, Sam, how was it for you?
Well, I mean, firstly, I was lucky enough to work with Rosie on a slightly longer project in terms of rehearsal time. We still, on that project, only had about 4 hours of rehearsal, but I kind of met Rosie for the first time properly there, and I was just very struck by finding someone who was, as you say, incredibly committed, but also, so she's this wonderful synthesis of kind of the actor and the singer, and that she doesn't compromise in either direction, I think, and that's quite a special thing to find. And so as soon as Dominic and I met, I was like, well, there is this singer that I've just been working with who I'd really like to try working with again. And I think we've got not a lot of time. We're going to need someone who's playful and disciplined and a singer and an actor and all of that stuff. So actually my job was, by the time I got there, my job was mostly done for me. It was basically a conversation with her about the finer details of why Daedally and Promethean are next to each other, like as words. What's the point of those two being in conflict with each other? Which when you can just kind of focus on that stuff means all of the hard work's done. And she's just one of those. Point? Okay, well,
that's a good question. Actually, something I was thinking earlier is for in case it slipped by anybody, we shouldn't take anything for granted. Who is Tiresias and why Tiresias?
Okay, cool. I'll do my best. I have recently got very into kind of my Greek mythology. And coming from theatre, Tiresias is also quite a common character who turns up in a lot of the Greek plays. And he is, in the mythological sense, Tiresias is a prophet, because he he ended up being like the chess piece between two of the Greek gods, who decided they needed to settle a bet as to whether men or women have the greatest pleasure in sex. And so Tiresias was forced by the gods to spend 7 years as a woman. And then at the end of which, I actually forget which way. I think Tiresias says that women have the greatest sex in pleasure, the greatest pleasure in sex, and therefore Hera is then scorned and curses Tiresias with blindness. But Zeus, to save Tiresias, then gives Tiresias the gift or curse of foresight, and therefore becomes this prophet who then appears, but is always prophesying things and warning people like Oedipus that if you go down this path, bad things are going to happen, and then has to basically watch them go down that path despite the prophecy. And so this idea that maybe if a program was designed by humanity to kind of try and take try and sell the idea of humanity to an alien species that existed, or to carry the seed of humanity. It might have been a Tiresias program that has the gift of foresight and also the gift of hindsight, and trying to kind of wrestle with those ideas and turning it into a kind of a strange cybernetic version of a Tiresias program.
Well, that orientates us into the world of Daedalus and Prometheus. It was, wasn't it?
Yes.
So how have they ended up next door to each other?
So
one's a human, one's a god, aren't they?
Well,
I don't know.
Not quite. Prometheus, if I'm correct, I think Prometheus is the Titan rather than the god specifically.
Oh yeah.
But Prometheus was basically cursed and nailed to the side of a mountain to have his liver removed by an eagle and eaten every day for the rest of time, because he stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. So he's become this kind of this symbol of technology being a double-edged sword, that you can't have technological advance without something bad going on with it. But the technological advance is really important. We have to have the fire, but we have to accept the bad that goes with it. And then putting that idea next to the idea of Daedalus, who made his son facilitated his son Icarus flying to the sun with wings of wax, felt like kind of wrestling between whether humanity is about kind of accepting the bad, or do they deliberately make the bad? Are they about kind of sacrificing their children, or are they about just, it's kind of accidental. We have to progress, and there will be bad things that come with it. Or are we throwing our children into the fire?
Yes, well, I'll stick a quick trail in here. If you want to know more about Icarus, type Icarus into the search bar on the Tete website, and you get a very beautiful opera by Michael Zev Gordon that is well worth watching. But plug over anyway to be here about your show. Dominic, there's a lot of ideas there, and they like... Opera is in a way driven by emotion, isn't it? How do those ideas become music, because that happened in you?
That's a very good question. It's a bit of both. It's kind of the conversations I had with Sam that helped. I knew I wanted the start of the opera, that first act, loads of stuff happening all over the place. It was, we had this conversation right at the start, this kind of idea of what if we have something like a kind of scrolling news feed, and it's used as a like a kind of denial, a separation of what is happening in the world. So I guess that first act to me is like kind of imagining the Tiresias 2 program almost like as if, the Voyager probe, I think it's Voyager and Voyager 2, they were crammed with all the information of humanity and sent out into space, and it'll only play if an alien civilization finds it. So it's this idea of something that's been kind of on standby, and then something, either the audience or something kind of triggers it. And musically, I wanted to just do as many kind of crazy things together as possible in that first act. And that was something that I tried in my early opera, What Happened to Anne. That was for a completely different reason. It was for a guilty conscience going mad. And this was more about a kind of damaged robot really trying at first to just spill everything out, that everything's happened. And then that second act is, the music kind of takes a different turn. The music isn't really, it's not really melody, or it's not really kind of music accompanying. It's more of an atmosphere. It's more of the scenery. I mean, you're on a stage and you need to have something that gives you more of a scope beyond this small stage that the singer is on. And it was a kind of it was trying to create silence. And I guess I took a lot of inspiration from like Takamitsu, especially Feldman, Morton Feldman, Rothko Chapel. In fact, those little drum bits, those on the tom, are very, very Feldman-esque. And that was deliberate because it was trying to create this essence of what he worked towards, of trying to be in the music. So like trying to have your audience inside the music as opposed to being observers of it. So especially, particularly in the second act, that was the kind of aim, to try and have the audience in it instead of sat there and being like, oh, cool.
Yeah, it definitely felt like that. It's possibly worth saying to our audience at home or wherever you are that you're very welcome to come back and re-watch this. And if you didn't watch it then with headphones, that might give you a bit more of that kind of a feeling, because they sounded great in mine anyway. Now, I've been trying to find the right way to frame this question in my mind. It's a thing that fascinates me more and more and more. It's maybe a thing you get the longer in the tooth you get, that I see patterns all the time in what people want to put on stages. So Tete-a-Tete's first show was a version of Fledermaus that happened to come in a great flurry of Fledermauses, or I did Hansel and Gretel for Scottish Opera in a year where there were Hansel and Gretels everywhere, because it was that amount of time after the 2008 crash, or at least that's my theory, that it took opera companies 3 or 4 years to go, that's the piece we've got to do now. And there's a really magic thing that you see emerging in the festival, which is a similar dialectic. So we've had, not surprisingly, 2017 festival. In the wake of the Brexit vote and Trump, there was a great deal of stuff about insularity, or there was a year about mental health or something. And there's something really interesting that's happened this year, which is that quite a lot of people are looking a very, very long way into the future, millions of years. And so I'm being careful framing that question, because I don't want to make you feel like I'm saying you're unoriginal, because that's not right. I think it's almost the opposite, that you have captured the zeitgeist. But did you know that, or tell us about what propelled you so far into the future? Maybe Sam, that's a good question to start with you.
Yeah, sure. So actually quite a timely question, because I'm reading a book at the moment specifically about mythology that's argued incredibly persuasively that mythology comes out of the anxieties of the practical world of the time. And so when you look at like the Paleolithic era, the mythologies they assume, I mean, I don't know how much exact evidence there is of this, but they assume that because the life of Paleolithic humanity was running around hunting primarily or copulating, that was it. It was eat, copulate, and hunt. That's all they have. And so a lot of the mythology at the time was about the idea of animal sacrifice. It was about the idea of quite a pantheistic idea of what God means, or deity, that there is deity within everything, that tree is deity, there is deity in rocks, there is everything is deity of some sort. And then in the Neolithic era, 10,000 years later, it's the agricultural revolution, and mythology starts to be about the idea that femininity is somehow about earthhood, and earthhood is femininity in some way, in that seeds and planting seeds and growing things out of seeds becomes a very heavy part of mythology. And so I'm rambling, but this idea that mythologies that we tell ourselves to try and understand the anxieties of the practical world we have starts to really resonate with me in kind of looking back at why we started making this. Because I was like, well, if there is any if there is any anxiety that we all really share that isn't quite narrow in focus, it's about the environment, it's about the future right now. And this idea that we kind of have a hopeless looking future because we seem absolutely incapable of making the changes that we need to make on a kind of global environmental level makes it obvious that then if you're a myth maker, and all performance makers are myth makers rather than fact makers, we are going to be anxious about those things. And so the mythologies we create are going to grow out of that anxiety. So we'll see a lot of futuristic, environmental, kind of, for want of a better phrase, cli-fi work, which is climate fiction. And I think that's why the zeitgeist exists, and we are kind of subliminally and kind of subconsciously all agreeing that we need to sort this out. But we're myth makers, so we do it creatively.
It's rather pleasing that it's Aristotle that roughly says that's the purpose of drama, isn't it? Just as Freud says that's the purpose of dreaming. It's that working through your problems by proxy kind of a thing. We're getting lovely comments in the chat. So I don't know if you see them, you two, but no questions, which is why I keep firing them at you. But we've heard from Laura Bowler that it's happening here. Amazing to hear the audience across Zoom. That's lovely. It was even more amazing to be sat in the middle of it. From Naomi Wu, yes, brilliantly committed performance from Rosie, and another plaudit from Laura for Rosie. I did think Dan Nolan on the percussion was making some amazing noises as well. Where did they come from, Dominic? Is this just out of your mind, or did you work with him to work them up or experiment?
I absolutely love limitation. So working with the more limited instrumentation I have, the more it kind of incentivizes me. And yes, it was COVID related. The original ensemble, I had got in touch with some ancient instruments people because I wanted to create this idea of, I always wanted to fuse these really old instruments with the synth. So the synth was always going to be there. And it was trying to create this kind of essence of something that's existed for a very, very long time. This kind of like proto music and like proto theatre, proto music sound world, but then also with this synth to kind of create this futuristic vibe. So bringing in this idea of, me and Sam discussed atavism a lot, this idea of something that's existed for a long time and then all of a sudden came back. So good example of that is Stravinsky's Rake's Progress, which is a very atavistic piece, kind of bringing back Baroque sounds. And then I wanted to bring back ancient sounds, but sounds before ancient sounds. And then that's when percussion came in, because when you listen to, I did a lot of research into kind of tribal musics. So the music that would have existed before there was any kind of sense of harmony, modality, melody, whatever. And it would have been, early man with some bones or some rocks, and they'd be banging it together to create rhythm, and maybe they'd be singing as well while doing that. So to me, the percussion is it kind of creates that really primal sound. But then also on top of that, the percussion in general has so many more kind of beautiful sounds to it and beautiful colors to it than just whacking things together. So it was kind of it was partly a discussion with Dan about what he had, And in fact, that I've forgotten the name of it. The thumb thing. In the second act, when he puts the thumb thing on the bass drum and it goes ding, and it creates that reverberation, that was something that he created, because I had initially written vibraphone, but I thought either drive all the way up and down to Manchester for you to play one note on the vibraphone for like 2 bars, or we're going to have to come up with something else. And that's what happens. So yeah, it was combination of color, combination of trying to create this kind of primal sound, bit of both.
Yeah, no, it sounded absolutely marvellous. Here's a question for Dominic, bad luck Sam, from Laura. As a composer who loves limitation, how does that aspect of your compositional process inform the vocal writing? Or is the vocal writing an area for release from those limitations?
That's a really good question. So in terms of the vocal writing specifically for Tiresias 2.0, I think when Sam introduced me to Rosie, and I listened to some of her pieces, and in fact I think I listened to one of yours, Laura, on the Voiceless, one of her Voiceless recordings, and I was just blown away that she could do so much.
I'll just lob in there. That's another video you can watch on the Tete website. Rosie said to me actually at the beginning of that rehearsal how useful that has been, and how many people have told her she's watched it. But anyway, sorry, Dominic, I interrupted.
No, that's all right. So I think when I mean limitation, I mean trying to get the most out of. So for example, limitation in terms of instrumentation. Trying to get as much sound and as much color out of these instruments. So specifically writing and working with Rosie, I already knew kind of beforehand that she could do so much, and she could both create like really kind of guttural spoken sounds. She could also, she was just so versatile in terms of what she could do. So I kind of took advantage of that. I love using the voice I love treating the voice as kind of like, as an instrument and not just the voice. And particularly writing vocal work, I try to make sure that those kind of bel canto sounds, kind of operatic, the kind of lovely operatic tone of voice, I try and limit that for a very small amount of time, so that it's, in this context, it was to try and create a more human element as opposed to a robotic element, and using the kind of Sprechstimme and guttural sounds and all sorts of stuff for the more robot element, and to create this idea of a broken robot as well. I don't know if that answered your question. If I didn't, please.
Well, Laura can let you know in the chat, but you'll have to do it quite quickly because we've only got a couple of minutes left. It's probably a good idea just to go back to Sam and then Dominic to see if you've got any parting shot. I meant to say, Sam, what is the name of your book? It might even magically appear in the chat. The book on mythology that you were mentioning.
I think I'd have to run and get it to be absolutely sure, but because I'm in the middle of reading it at the moment, I think it's called A Short History of Mythology, and it's part of the. There was a publishing group that did a big series on myths, and myth as an idea. And Margaret Atwood wrote a book. One of her books is in this series, and it's a huge series of lovely writing. But it was begun with almost like an essay. And I think it's called A Short History of Myth. It's short, but a beautiful book that has really kind of captured my imagination.
Yeah, it does begin to
please don't ask me the name of the writer. I can't remember. I know she's female.
Could it be
I cannot remember
Karen
the writer.
Armstrong?
There we go.
Armstrong.
Karen Armstrong. My wife has helped.
It's amazing, amazing. Well, and Leo sitting here in this rather futuristic context I'm in the hands. Dominic, parting shot from you for your audience.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to go back to what you were discussing about this idea of why so many composers, why so many artists are focusing their stuff on stuff that's really happening in the here and now. And particularly in my case, I had always tried to distance myself from politics and tried to distance myself from the real world because, one, I felt I didn't have enough of a say, kind of really, to really hammer it home. But I think we've kind of come to this point where it's almost forced our hands. So, and you also, without sounding too pretentious and kind of outright and so on, I think the state the world is in now, it's almost made us have to write music and art that does affect this time. And especially this piece, and it was something I missed say. I said it in the rehearsal of my speech, and I didn't say it in the real one. When the audience listened to it, and this is something that me and Sam were kind of talking about and really adamant on. When the audience listened to it and when the audience watched it, we didn't want it to be just going home and being like, oh, that was a really cool opera. Oh, that was really exciting. We really wanted the audience to sit and to watch it and to think, oh, wow. Not only, oh, wow, this could happen, this is the way that the world is in, and if we don't change, Tiresias 2.0 isn't too far-fetched, but also giving that incentive that, because the opera highlights both the beauty and the destructive nature of humanity equally, and at the end of the day, we wanted the audience to kind of go out and say, actually, humanity is all about, the beauty of humanity is this ability to change, and we can still change the course of history, and Tiresias 2.0 can then become a work of fiction and not a work of reality.
Well, a very positive note to end on. Well done, you two. Thank you very much. And audience, if you at home would like to support these guys to get this piece along a bit further, it's easydonate.org/TWO, and tell all your friends they can buy tickets to this interactive broadcast and see it or even dial into it for another 28 days. Anyway, thank you very much. A really interesting session and great show. Cheers.
Thanks, Bill.